On July 4, 1863, just one day after Lee's defeat at Gettysburg, Vicksburg surrendered. This victory gave the Union control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two and severing vital supply lines. Vicksburg cemented Grant's reputation as one of the Union's most effective generals and set the stage for his eventual promotion to commander of all Union forces. After the twin victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, the momentum shifted decisively to the Union. Confederate forces struggled to recover from their losses, while the Union began to press its advantages on all fronts. The Union Navy's blockade of southern ports, part of the Anaconda Plan, strangled the Confederacy's economy. Food shortages and inflation plagued Southern civilians, undermining support for the war effort. Meanwhile, the Union's industrial might ensured a steady supply of weapons, ammunition, and resources for its armies. Another key turning point was the increasing involvement of African American soldiers. Units like the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment demonstrated extraordinary courage, proving their worth in battles like the assault on Fort Wagner. Their participation not only bolstered Union ranks but also symbolized the war's evolving purpose. By fighting for the Union, African Americans were also fighting for their freedom and the future of their nation. In late 1863, the Union achieved another critical victory at the Battle of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Grant's forces broke through Confederate lines, securing control of vital railroads and opening the door for a campaign into the Deep South. Lincoln recognized Grant's leadership and, in 1864, promoted him to commander of all Union armies. With Grant at the helm, the Union launched a relentless campaign to bring the war to a close. From the carnage of Antietam to the triumphs of Gettysburg and Vicksburg, these turning points reshaped the Civil War. They defined not only the military trajectory of the conflict but also its deeper meaning. By the end of 1863, the Union had gained the upper hand. But the road to victory would still be long, and the cost of preserving the nation would only grow higher. On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued one of the most significant documents in American history, the Emancipation Proclamation. Though its immediate effects were limited, its impact on the Civil War and the broader struggle for human rights would resonate for generations. To understand its importance, we must delve into the context, motivations, and consequences of this groundbreaking act. When the Civil War began in April 1861, Lincoln's primary goal was clear: to preserve the Union. While slavery was the root cause of the conflict, Lincoln initially avoided framing the war as a crusade to abolish it. He feared alienating the border states, slaveholding states like Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri that had remained loyal to the Union. Their support was crucial to the Union's survival. However, as the war dragged on, it became clear that slavery was not just a moral issue, it was a strategic one. The Southern economy, and therefore its war effort, depended on enslaved labor. By targeting slavery, Lincoln could weaken the Confederacy while redefining the purpose of the war. The turning point came after the Battle of Antietam in September 1862. Though tactically inconclusive, the Union claimed it as a strategic victory because it halted General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North. Lincoln had been waiting for such a moment to announce his plans for emancipation, believing he needed to act from a position of strength. On September 22, 1862, Lincoln issued a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that unless the rebellious states returned to the Union by January 1, 1863, all enslaved people in those states would be declared free. The Confederacy, of course, ignored the ultimatum, setting the stage for the full proclamation. On January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. It declared that all persons held as slaves in Confederate-controlled territories are, and henceforward shall be free. Importantly, it applied only to areas in rebellion, not to the border states or regions already under Union control. This limitation was deliberate. Lincoln didn't believe he had the constitutional authority to abolish slavery everywhere, but as commander-in-chief, he argued that emancipation in rebel territories was a military necessity. While it didn't immediately free any enslaved people, it struck a critical blow against the institution of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation was met with mixed reactions. In the North, abolitionists like Frederick Douglass celebrated it as a monumental step toward justice, though many were frustrated that it didn't abolish slavery everywhere. Not everyone in the Union supported emancipation. Northern Democrats, known as Copperheads, accused Lincoln of overstepping his authority and transforming the war into a social revolution. They feared the proclamation would alienate white voters and spark racial tensions. In the South, the proclamation was seen as an act of war aimed at inciting slave rebellions. Confederate leaders used it to rally support for their cause, portraying Lincoln as a tyrant threatening their way of life. One of the most immediate effects of the Emancipation Proclamation was its impact on African Americans. It gave them a direct stake in the war's outcome and opened the door for their participation in the Union Army. Over 180,000 African American men would enlist, serving in units like the famous 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. Their bravery and sacrifice proved essential to the Union war effort, shifting public perception and challenging deeply held prejudices. Enslaved people in the South also took bold steps to claim their freedom, fleeing plantations and seeking refuge with Union forces. The proclamation became a beacon of hope, signaling that the fight for freedom was within reach. The Emancipation Proclamation had a profound impact beyond American borders. European powers, particularly Britain and France, had been considering recognizing the Confederacy. However, with the proclamation, Lincoln reframed the war as a moral crusade against slavery. Public opinion in Europe, where abolitionist movements were strong, shifted firmly in favor of the Union. The Confederacy's hopes for international support were dashed, leaving it increasingly isolated. While the Emancipation Proclamation didn't end slavery, that would come with the 13th Amendment, it was a critical turning point in the Civil War and American history. It transformed the conflict from a battle to preserve the Union into a fight for freedom and equality. Lincoln himself saw the proclamation as one of his greatest achievements. He famously said, "If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." The Emancipation Proclamation was more than a wartime strategy, it was a declaration of values. It laid the foundation for the abolition of slavery and the broader struggle for civil rights. In doing so, it redefined what America could and should be, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire generations. By 1864, the American Civil War had raged for 3 long years. Hundreds of thousands were dead, cities were in ruins, and the nation was fractured. The Confederacy was struggling to sustain its war effort, while the Union, under the determined leadership of Abraham Lincoln and General Ulysses S. Grant, pressed forward. This was the final phase of the war, a bloody, relentless campaign that would finally bring an end to the conflict but leave an indelible mark on the United States. In 1864, President Lincoln promoted Ulysses S. Grant to General-in-Chief of all Union armies. Grant's appointment marked a turning point in Union strategy. Unlike his predecessors, Grant was determined to use the Union's numerical and industrial advantages to overwhelm the Confederacy. His strategy was simple but brutal: wage a war of attrition, targeting Confederate armies and infrastructure until they could no longer fight. Grant's overland campaign began in May 1864 with a series of relentless battles in Virginia. The Battle of the Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, and Cold Harbor were some of the bloodiest of the war, resulting in tens of thousands of casualties on both sides. Despite heavy losses, Grant refused to retreat. He pressed forward, knowing that the Union could replace its losses, while the Confederacy could not. While Grant focused on Lee's army in Virginia, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman launched a devastating campaign through the heart of the Confederacy. In May 1864, Sherman's forces captured Atlanta, a vital railroad hub and industrial center. The fall of Atlanta was a major blow to Southern morale and a turning point in the Union's favor. After Atlanta, Sherman began his infamous March to the Sea. His army cut a 60-mile-wide path of destruction through Georgia, targeting infrastructure, crops, and resources vital to the Confederate war effort. This strategy, known as total war, aimed to break the South's will to fight. As Sherman advanced, thousands of enslaved people followed his army, seeking freedom and protection. For many, Sherman's march symbolized the collapse of the Confederate dream and the dawn of a new chapter in American history. Meanwhile, in Virginia, Grant's forces laid siege to Petersburg, a critical supply hub for the Confederate capital of Richmond. For 9 months, Union and Confederate soldiers faced off in brutal trench warfare, reminiscent of what the world would later see in World War I. One of the most infamous moments of the siege was the Battle of the Crater. Union forces detonated a massive mine under Confederate defenses, creating a gaping hole in their lines. However, poor planning turned the attack into a disaster, with Union troops trapped and slaughtered in the crater. By March 1865, the Confederates could no longer hold Petersburg. Union forces broke through, forcing Lee's army to retreat. With Petersburg lost, Richmond fell soon after. The Confederate government fled, and Union troops marched into the burning city on April 3, 1865. By April 1865, the Confederacy was on its last legs. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, once the pride of the Confederacy, was exhausted, outnumbered, and surrounded. On April 9, Lee met with Grant at Appomattox Courthouse to discuss terms of surrender. Grant offered generous terms. Confederate soldiers could return home with their horses and personal belongings, and officers could keep their sidearms. There would be no trials for treason, no executions. Lee accepted, and the surrender at Appomattox effectively ended the Civil War. As word of the surrender spread, other Confederate forces laid down their arms. By the summer of 1865, the war was over. Just days after Lee's surrender, tragedy struck the nation. On April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth while attending a play at Ford's Theater. Lincoln died the next morning, plunging the nation into mourning. Lincoln's death was a devastating blow to a country already reeling from 4 years of war. His vision for reconciliation and rebuilding the Union would be left unfinished, leaving a contentious legacy for his successors to navigate. The Civil War claimed over 620,000 lives, more than any other conflict in American history. Millions more were wounded, displaced, or forever scarred. The South was left in ruins, its economy shattered and its social structure upended. The North, though victorious, bore its own scars, having endured years of bloodshed and loss. Beyond the physical devastation, the war left deep emotional and political divisions. The question now was how to heal and rebuild a fractured nation. The war brought about one undeniable triumph: the abolition of slavery. The 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, legally ended slavery in the United States. Millions of African Americans were now free, but their struggle for true equality was just beginning. Reconstruction brought both hope and challenges, as the nation grappled with how to integrate formerly enslaved people into society and rebuild the South. Though the war ended slavery, it did not end racism or inequality, issues that would continue to shape the American story. The end of the Civil War marked the beginning of a new chapter in American history, one filled with promise, struggle, and transformation. The sacrifices made during those 4 years laid the foundation for a more united, but far from perfect, nation. The war's lessons continue to resonate, reminding us of the cost of division in the enduring fight for freedom and equality. The Civil War ended in 1865, but the story of America's transformation was far from over. The years that followed, the Reconstruction Era, were a time of rebuilding, reinvention, and conflict. The challenges of reuniting a divided nation, addressing the injustices of slavery, and integrating millions of freed African Americans into society would shape the United States for generations to come. When the Civil War ended, the South lay in ruins. Cities like Richmond, Atlanta, and Charleston were destroyed, railroads and factories were inoperable, and the agricultural economy, once dependent on enslaved labor, was devastated. The human toll was just as staggering. Over 620,000 soldiers had died, and countless families were left grieving. In the North, victorious but weary, many hoped for a quick reconciliation. In the South, bitterness and resistance simmered. For both sides, the question of how to rebuild and redefine the nation loomed large. Abraham Lincoln had envisioned a Reconstruction process based on reconciliation and healing. In his second inaugural address, he called for malice toward none and charity for all. His plan for Reconstruction, known as the 10% Plan, was relatively lenient. It allowed Southern states to rejoin the Union if 10% of their voters pledged loyalty and accepted the abolition of slavery. But Lincoln's vision was cut short by his assassination in April 1865. His successor, Andrew Johnson, lacked Lincoln's political skill and moral clarity. Johnson sought to quickly reintegrate the Southern states with minimal federal oversight, a policy that would soon clash with Congress. Congress, led by radical Republicans, rejected Johnson's leniency and took control of Reconstruction. They passed the Reconstruction Acts of 1867, dividing the South into 5 military districts governed by Union generals. These laws required Southern states to ratify the 14th Amendment, granting citizenship and equal protection under the law to all Americans, including freed African Americans. Radical Reconstruction also saw African Americans achieve unprecedented political power. For the first time, black men voted, held public office, and influenced state and local governments. Leaders like Hiram Revels and Blanche K. Bruce became U.S. senators, symbolizing the potential for a more inclusive democracy. The federal government established the Freedmen's Bureau to assist formerly enslaved people as they transitioned to freedom. The Bureau provided food, medical care, and education, while also helping African Americans negotiate labor contracts and reunite with family members separated by slavery. Perhaps its most significant achievement was in education. Schools for African Americans sprang up across the South, laying the groundwork for future generations. However, the Bureau faced resistance from white Southerners and was underfunded, limiting its impact. Reconstruction was met with fierce resistance in the South. Groups like the Ku Klux Klan used violence and intimidation to suppress African Americans and restore white supremacy. Freedmen who tried to vote or assert their rights often faced brutal reprisals, including lynchings and arson. Many Southern states passed black codes, laws designed to restrict the freedom of African Americans and force them into exploitative labor systems resembling slavery. These measures undermined the gains of Reconstruction and deepened racial divisions. By the mid-1870s, Reconstruction was losing support. Economic crises, political scandals, and waning Northern interest in Southern affairs weakened the federal government's commitment to enforcing civil rights. The final blow came with the Compromise of 1877, which resolved the disputed presidential election between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden. In exchange for Hayes becoming president, federal troops were withdrawn from the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. With the federal government no longer enforcing civil rights, white supremacists regained control, and the era of Jim Crow segregation began. Though Reconstruction ended in failure, it left behind a powerful legacy. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments abolished slavery, established birthright citizenship, and protected voting rights regardless of race. These amendments became the foundation for future struggles for equality, from the civil rights movement of the 1960s to ongoing efforts for racial justice today. Reconstruction also revealed the profound challenges of building a multiracial democracy. The promises of freedom and equality were not fully realized, but the era's achievements laid the groundwork for generations of activists to continue the fight. The Reconstruction era remains one of the most misunderstood periods in American history. For decades, it was portrayed in films like The Birth of a Nation as a time of corruption and mismanagement, perpetuating racist myths about African American incompetence. These depictions obscure the extraordinary achievements of freedmen and the progressive vision of radical Reconstruction. Today, historians recognize Reconstruction as a bold, though imperfect, attempt to create a more just society. It was a time of hope and betrayal, progress and backlash, a period that continues to shape America's identity and its ongoing struggle with race and equality. Reconstruction teaches us that progress is possible, but not inevitable. It shows the importance of vigilance in protecting civil rights and the dangers of complacency in the face of injustice. As we reflect on this critical period in history, we are reminded that the fight for equality and unity is never truly over. It is a responsibility passed down from one generation to the next. The story of the Civil War and Reconstruction isn't just about the past, it's about understanding the foundations of our present and the lessons we carry into the future. If you found this journey through history meaningful, there's so much more to explore. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of history enthusiasts. Together, we'll continue uncovering the stories that shape the world. If this video taught you something new, give it a thumbs up. Share it with friends, classmates, or anyone who loves diving into the past. What surprised you most about the Civil War or Reconstruction? Do you think we've fully reckoned with this legacy? Let's start a conversation in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. History is powerful, and it belongs to all of us. By learning from the past, we can shape a better future. Thanks for watching Historian AI. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe.